Hey, deserving listeners, it's just me today. I thought I would answer some emails. A lot of you email me, and I always try to get to all of them, but I can't these days. But I can get to some by doing some of these episodes. Patron Kate from North Carolina writes in and says, what are the main theories of counseling, or what are your main theories of counseling? I'm currently getting my master's in counseling, and I really admire your technique. What are your main theories? I recognize that you use person-centered, EFT, and psychodynamic techniques, but do you also use REBT, DBT, and other theories? Thank you so much for even reading this. I admire your work. Oh, well, thank you, Patron Kate from North Carolina. So, well, the first thing is let's just establish what are the available umbrellas that I will be talking about here. The main umbrellas of theory, and there are different categorizations, but this is mine, is we have the first category, which I'm going to just label like the psychodynamic category. In this category, you have Freud, psychoanalysis, relational psychotherapy, interpersonal, intersubjective. These people are really interested in your past and how your personality developed in relation to your environment and your disposition, your temperament, and how these personality structures become relatively fixed over time, that you have defenses, that you have relationship patterns, that you have distortions of the world, that you need corrective experiences. And so I definitely hold for myself when I'm treating clients and the way I see myself and everyone around me, I definitely see people through a psychodynamic lens. But psychodynamic theory is literally 140 years old. And so there are a lot of different corners and avenues that vary from each other. So to say I'm psychodynamic doesn't really mean much until you actually hear me describe how I see the world and exactly what I do, which is essentially that our early relationships form our defenses, our relational defenses, and our templates for seeing the world, and our templates for seeing the self, and our templates for how to deal with difficulty, and our templates for how to get love. And these become relatively fixed, can be changed later in life with some difficulty. And that in therapy, there's a lot of transference, countertransference happening. There's a lot of defenses that are taking place. And by having some awareness while having corrective experiences will help and has helped. So that's one theory that I definitely, if I was to pick one or two theories, that would definitely be in my top two. The next theory that I'm breaking out of psychodynamic theory, which often isn't, is attachment theory. As many of you know, I'm very attachment based, and the problem I have in my culture, in my discipline, is that a lot of people consider attachment theory to be just for children. But as you know, listening to this podcast, attachment goes throughout your entire life and really affects every single relationship you're in. The relationship you have with the bus driver is affected by both of your attachment needs and your attachment reactivity. Within this major umbrella of therapy, there's not a lot of therapies. You could say psychodynamic, certain parts of psychodynamic therapy are within attachment. But the only one that's really firmly in attachment that is popular is emotion-focused therapy, of which I definitely use. Although I will say that I developed my ideas of attachment and human beings before I ever knew about EFT. So I kind of think that I'm more psychodynamic attachment based. And then when I learned about EFT, I was like, oh, I guess that kind of fits my viewpoint. The other thing is I don't use EFT as a technique. I find the technique to, it's fine, but it just doesn't fit with me. The ideas fit with me. But again, I think I came to the ideas before I came across EFT. But anyway, but attachment theory, John Bowlby, I learned early in my career, and the biology of that, the evolution of that, the reactivity of that, the attachment styles, I think, are useful. Thinking about how we are basically in a constant state of, am I securely attached? Do I have someone that I can depend on? And when you feel that you do have someone you can depend on, then our physiology is balanced, our emotions are balanced, our sleep is balanced, our self-esteem is balanced. So attachment is very important to the way I see the world, if not the primary way. And as you know, when you listen to the podcast, it goes, it goes deeper than just the typical surface level that people will talk about on the internet. But anyway, so that's the other umbrella. The other umbrella is biology. In this umbrella, we're talking about the brain, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about diet and sleep. And this is also very important to me. It's obvious that, and it's absolutely shown in the scientific evidence, that the way we treat our bodies and our brain included is very important in our moods and our relationships and our energy and our self-esteem and our ability to function and our symptomology for depression, anxiety, ADHD, and beyond. And so paying attention to diet, sleep, exercise, and then also how trauma manifests in the brain, how it, what fires together, wires together, all this kind of stuff. Mirror neurons, all these kinds of things are very important that go way beyond just psychotropic drugs. Of course, that's included in here too. But, that's only in my estimation, 3% of this umbrella. The rest of it is all the other things I've been rattling off. So I definitely use a lot of ideas from biology and from anyway, I use a lot of biology. The next umbrella is systems, which I also use, which includes structural, Bowen, Satir, Whitaker, lots of different other kinds of systems, family systems, theories. The main ideas here are that groups of people will coalesce into a system, a family, a couple, a classroom, a workplace, and the system wants to establish a homeostasis. And the homeostasis is the set of rules that dictate everyone's behavior. When someone is afraid, who do they go to? Or, when the group needs a leader, who steps forward and who pressures the people to step forward? An example of this is when I'm with my family. I have a large family, and we get together. And I noticed this when I was in my 20s, that we'll be at Wajimaya here in Seattle. It's a Japanese grocery store. And we'll all just kind of be standing around talking. And at some point, I'm thinking, well, I know everyone's hungry, so I think we should probably go eat. But I don't want to bother anyone. Everyone seems to just be happy just sitting here talking. But then at a certain point, I stepped forward, and I just felt like we'd been standing for too long in the rice cracker aisle talking. And I said, all right, let's go to a restaurant and eat, or let's go to the food court and eat. And then everyone just, okay, let's go. So everyone was apparently kind of waiting for someone to step forward, and I was the one who stepped forward. And then throughout my adult life, I just knew that I was at least one of the people among the 20, 30 people in my extended family that will step forward and push to the next phase, and that other people will never do that. There are certain people who will never, ever suggest we move on to the next phase because they're being too polite, which is a very Japanese American thing too. But I apparently don't have that entire quality of harmony all the time. I'm like, no, this is boring. We're standing in the rice cracker aisle, just standing. We're blocking everyone's access to the rice crackers. Let's move to the food court and eat because I'm hungry. And I'm sure y'all are too. And so this is a systemic idea that, how did I step forward? Is that because of my personality? No, it's because the system needed someone to step forward and do that. And this, of course, applies to all the little interactions that you exhibit or feel motivated to do in any system, whether it's rebellion or overfunctioning or failure. All of these behaviors can be conceptualized through a systemic lens, in that the person isn't motivated by purely internal means. They're motivated by how they fit into their system, what the system needs. For example, the system might need someone to distract everyone from the pain that everyone's going through. And so that person might step forward to be the star of the family. That person is the delegate, the person who does well in school or sports or at a job. Or you have another, there might be a little narcissistic. Another person might step forward and be the rebel and be the screw up, and that distracts the family. That's just another example. And there are thousands other kinds of functions and roles that families will exhibit and individuals will exhibit. And so this is family systems. And the other major idea is mutual causality, circular causality, nonlinear causality, recursive patterns. These are all labels to describe the same thing, which is that when we typically look at things linearly, like when we see someone, we see a couple married couple, and we see the husband is like yelling and screaming at the wife. And we look at that and we say, well, something's wrong with that guy. He has an anger problem, or he has depression or something. He needs to be medicated, or he needs his own individual therapy. He needs anger management. Okay, that might all be true, but you really need to look at the system, at least the two-person system of the marriage. What is the back and forth between those two people? Maybe over the span of a month or years, there have been various different interactions between the two people that push both people to what we end up seeing in the end. So, for example, if we go back in time, just even earlier that day, so by evening, we see a yelling husband at a wife. We go back to the beginning of the day, and the husband wakes up and he's in a good mood, and he goes to the wife and he says, "Hey, I have all these plans. I want to, mow the lawn, and I want to clean the garage." And he has all good intentions, but he doesn't really process Sunday, the weekends days the same way the wife does. The wife thinks of weekend days as relaxation time. The husband thinks of weekends as getting stuff done time. And so the husband goes, "Oh, I'm so excited. I want to clean the garage. Let's do it. Let's do it." And the wife is like, "Oh, this sounds exhausting, And she just says, "Man, can't we just relax?" And she says it with a little bit of criticism, a little bit of contempt. Not a lot, but just like annoyance. Like, do we really have to? And the husband is hurt by that. Attachment-wise, he feels insulted. He feels like the wind is being, out of his sails. The rug's being pulled out from underneath him. He was on a roll. Then all of a sudden he goes to his wife and she gives him this face. And although she's perfectly fine and valid to allocate or to advocate for that, to just be like, "Look, it's a Sunday. I want to relax. I don't want to do those things." She doesn't really know how to communicate that in a way that doesn't hurt his feelings. He also might be overly sensitive, and then he gets hurt, and then he goes, and he storms out of the room, and he communicates that he's upset by giving her the silent treatment for an hour, and she now is upset at him because she's like, "He always does this to me. Why can't we just relax on a Sunday? Like, how come he's always like demanding that I do things?" And now she's hurt. Now she transforms that into some hostility, and she starts slamming doors, and then he starts slamming doors, and blah, 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 escalation up the ladder. By the evening time, he's screaming, and she is quiet because her way of showing her contempt is to be quiet, and his way of showing his contempt is through yelling. So we see there that the way the two of them were triggering each other, if you will, is what we need to look at. We can't just look at his behavior and go, "There's something wrong with him." We have to look at the dynamic between the two, and we have to address the dynamic between the two. Neither is to blame. Both are to blame. It doesn't matter who's to blame. The system is to blame. We don't have to look at things linearly. We can look at things systemically, or how recursive, circular, nonlinear patterns develop in people and contribute to all the woes that we have in life, whether it's in relationships, at work, with ourselves. So systems are I definitely adhere to as well, to answer your question, Patron Kate from California or North Carolina. Number 5 is multiculturalism, social constructionism, feminism, all the isms that concern themselves with society and power and oppression and internalized oppression and racism and sexism and ableism and all the other isms, and systemic problems in society, historical problems that contribute to our current problems, political problems, money problems, economic problems, class problems. And so all these things affect how we feel about ourselves, our interactions within our relationships, and these things need to be considered. The relationship between the therapist and the client needs to be looked at through a feminist lens, through a social constructionist lens, through an oppressive lens, a class lens, because the therapist is often has more privilege than the client does. Not always, but usually they do, by their education and their place in the room. And without having a critical eye on that power structure in the therapy office, bad things can happen. And continued oppression can happen. Clients can feel like they don't have power, and they just sort of give in because everyone agrees that the therapist is a god and the client is a peon. And that's just in the therapy office. I mean, think about all the other contexts in which this can happen, obviously. So this is a very important thing to look at. Similar to systems, if you don't see this, if you don't zoom out and look at people through these contextual issues, then you're completely missing a huge part of what's affecting the individual. The sixth umbrella is the cognitive psychotherapy, cognitive psychology, which is the idea that our interpretations, the stories we tell ourselves, schema therapy is kind of in here as well. But it's also kind of a psychodynamic and attachment-based idea as well. But anyway, cognitive therapy is obvious. The way you think about things, the way that you, and this is REBT you mentioned earlier, Kate, is usually considered a cognitive or behavioral therapy, but I think it's more cognitive in my opinion. But and by the way, I don't like the fact that cognitive behavioral therapy is lumped into one. It doesn't make a lot of sense that it is. I think it's important to tease the two of them out, because you need to understand. You can certainly integrate the two of them, but you need to understand both of them well before you can integrate them. But anyway, the idea that our interpretations, our automatic thoughts, our belief systems affect the way that we interpret things, and thus affect the way that we feel about them, and then affect the way that we react, because our feelings motivate a lot of things. So in looking at the world through a cognitive lens, our interpretations are very important, and we need to make sure that we have some control over, or at least evaluate that and have some control over our interpretations. For example, going back to this couple, we could look at the wife, or we could talk to the husband. So the husband gets up in the morning. He's just like, "Oh my God, I can't wait to get on the day. It's just so great." And so he goes to his wife. He says, "Yeah, we're gonna clean the house." And she looks at him like, "Do we have to?" Okay, so in that moment, his cognitive interpretation, his cognitions about her face, about her rejection of that idea, are very important. If he looks at it in a way, and this it can be hard to exert control over, but it is important to look at. But if he looks at the situation like, she's rejecting me, she doesn't love me, she is being a lump on a log, she is purposely trying to foil my plans, then of course that will lead to a lot of hurt, and thus a lot of sadness, and then a lot of transformation into anger and hostility, and then slamming of doors. Whereas if he interprets it like, well, she doesn't like to do things on Sundays like I do, and she's a little scared that if I force her to do it, then she's going to resent that. And so she's kind of pre-annoyed by that process. So if you see it that way, then you give her a little bit more grace, a little bit more leeway, a little bit more charity, and you're just like, okay, yeah, that's right. You don't like doing those things on Sunday. That's cool. Even though she didn't give him that information, she just gave him annoying face. But if he thought about it or could interpret that correctly, then he would have less pain, and thus less reason to be hostile and less reason to trigger her. So cognition, and this cognitive idea spans literally every single problem you've ever had. There's always an element of cognitive therapy that can be utilized in these moments. Whether or not it's the best thing to do in the moment, I don't know. But the way we interpret things is very, very important. Now, we don't always have control over that, but it's important to evaluate that. Then number 7 umbrella is we have behavioral therapy, which is also obvious. Anyone who knows about anything. Even 5-year-olds understand behavioral therapy in a nutshell, which is that when you reward something, then people tend to repeat that behavior. And when you tend to give a bad consequence to something, that tends to negate the behavior. Or if you don't, or in the absence of a reward, you tend to not do that behavior anymore, right? And obviously, when you're training your pets, this is a known thing, but humans are the same way. We're just a little bit more, not always, but sometimes we're a little bit more complicated about it. So, for example, getting back to our couple, the husband says, "Oh, I can't wait to hey, wife, let's go clean the garage and let's mow the lawn." And in that moment, the wife has this goal. She's like, I don't want to do anything today. But I also don't want to piss him off, and I don't want to make it so that he can't ask me for help. So what do I want to do here? This is also getting back to Bowen, differentiation in systems. But anyway, what do I want to do here? Well, what I want him to do is feel free to do these things on his own, but I also don't want him to pressure me to do these things. So what's going to be my set of responses so that I can encourage good behavior from my husband now and in the future? So what do? Well, if I give him annoying face, I don't know if he's going to interpret that quite right. And part of that is going to be me punishing him just for being excited, me punishing him just for asking me for help or something, me punishing him for just having a plan for the day. And I certainly don't want to punish him for that. But I also don't want to have to do these things. Okay, so what do? Well, I might go to him and say, honey, I love your enthusiasm, and I love that you want to do these things. But I really, really, really just want to relax on this Sunday. And is that okay? So looked at through a behavioral lens, you're trying to shape behavior from your husband in a way that actually meets your overall goals. Now, sometimes you can't really figure that out on your own. You need a therapist to help you with that. But that's the general idea of behavioral therapy. Now, of course, you can be much more micro on that, like you're trying to train a 10-year-old to, you're trying to potty train someone younger than that. Or, anyway, point is some kids, it takes a while, given developmental issues, for them to be potty trained. My point is that there are obvious behavioral elements to all of our lives. Our eating patterns, are often dictated by behavioral ideas. Also, exposure therapy is in this zone as well. Behavioral therapy and exposure therapy and trauma therapy is definitely a behaviorist idea. So that's another umbrella that I absolutely incorporate into my therapy. The eighth umbrella that I incorporate is the brief or postmodern category. Here we have solution-focused, narrative, Milton Erickson, Jay Haley, strategic therapy, this kind of thing. The idea is that, it's hard to really, collaborative is another word to be used in here, and some people wouldn't lump all these things together, but the idea is that people have the ability to fix their own problems. You just have to help them find their solutions. So a common example in solution-focused is someone comes to you let's say the husband comes into therapy and he's like, yeah, my wife, she's just such a bummer, and she just sits there and she insults me, and she's like always annoyed with me. I don't understand. Like, I was really happy, and she's got really crazy with me. And you'd say to him, okay, so you're saying that it didn't go well for you that morning. So tell me what happened. Tell me the sequence of events. And he says, well, this happened, this happened. And you say, okay, well, when was tell me about a similar situation in which it didn't go that way, where it went well or neutral. And he says, well, okay. And sometimes it takes a while to figure this out, but the husband's like, well, there's this one time where I was, I came to my wife and I said, I want to do these things, but if you don't want to do it, that's okay. And things tended to go a little better that time. I don't know. And then the therapist says, oh, okay. So in that instance, you managed to get what you wanted because your behavior was a little different than the time that you told me about earlier. I see. So it sounds like the answer to your problems. It sounds like maybe you have some experimenting to do in terms of what kinds of. So it's this notion of you're just a kind of like a coach for the client to find their own solutions that they've found in the past. Now, this has its limitations, of course, and I would never use this purely with clients, but it is a helpful technique. It's really a mindset that you have, and it's really hard to adopt. And a lot of people will study solution focus or narrative, and in my view, they don't really get it because it's a very different way of thinking. It's very hard to think like a true solution-focused therapist. Most people do not think like solution-focused people, where you truly let go of, as a therapist, of any notion that you have any idea what other people should do. And it's hard not to be that way. Almost every other therapy type there's this notion that the therapist knows more than the client. With solution-focused people, narrative people, they do not believe that. They don't fake that. They literally believe, I do not know anything about how to solve these people's problems. They already have the answers. They have just been told they don't have the answers, and I'm just going to help them to find. It's kind of a version of I know better than them, but anyway. I can't go down that road. It's too complicated. But I definitely use that technique. And listen to my episodes. I think I did a whole deep dive on narrative therapy, and I've done some episodes on Erickson as well. The ninth umbrella, which is the only other umbrella that is in my field, which I also integrate, is humanistic, which is a huge part of the way I see the world. It, in this category, we have experiential, Gestalt, Rogers, Maslow, Satir, Whitaker, lots of others, existential. These therapies, they're very different, but they basically hang together in this idea that you want to focus on the here and now. Our future tripping or thinking too much about the past, lingering in the past too much, can really keep us from being who we are and knowing who we are. It distracts us from who we are, because who we are largely exists right now. Who am I right now? What is my body going through right now? And a lot of us growing up have not had enough practice with that because our parents didn't help us with that. When you have secure attachment, attunement, then the parent has a lot of energy spent on like, how are you feeling right now, child? Oh, it looks like you feel hungry right now, or it looks like you feel happy right now. And the child is like, that's who I am. Interesting. Because when you know who you are, this is that sense of self thing, connection with yourself. When you know who you are and your connection with that from an early age throughout your life, you are in connection with your needs, and thus you're in connection with your road to happiness and your road away from pain. If you aren't in connection with yourself, if you're not in connection with the here and now, you're not in connection with your needs, which can be hard to do if you don't have a lot of practice from early childhood, then you literally have no roadmap to happiness. You don't know what you're supposed to do. You're just randomly behaving, hoping that something will make you happy. But that is not an effective way to gain happiness, right? So being in the here and now has something to do with that. It also has to do with being authentic and being okay with who you are. That's another big part of humanistic therapy, is you're okay. You don't have to be different. You're good as you are. And it's this idea that you have, the ability to heal yourself. You just need the barriers to get out of the way. The barriers imposed by your parents or bullies or society or racism or sexism. We need to get rid of those things, and you'll be able to find happiness because you know what you need and you know how to get there. And let me give you a lot of unconditional positive regard. Let me listen to you. Let me validate you. And within that space of exploration in the here and now and what you need and who you are and what your goals are or how you see yourself in that space of safe reflection on who you are, then the self can figure out their own answers to their own problems. But you can't really get there until you have that person-centered humanistic space, existential space, where you're really just allowed to be who you are. And anyway, so there's a lot of variants to that, but humanistic, and it's very emotional focused. EFT is also a humanistic therapy in that, humanistic, experiential, Gestalt, Rogers are very interested in emotional expression. I think one of the major foundations of humanistic psychotherapy is this idea that people throughout their life, particularly in mainstream American culture, have been told not to be emotional, and that can cause a lot of strife in emotions, in depression and anxiety in relationships. And so humanistic therapy tends to be very interested in how do you feel? Tell me how you feel, because it's this assumption that unless the therapist really draws that out, the human won't actually exhibit that because they're terrified of all the shame that they typically get from that. And so whenever I talk about, advocating for people crying and just saying, hey, it's okay to cry, that's kind of a humanistic idea. If I was to pick one theory of the 9 that I rattled off, when I talk about that's a humanistic idea, that the healing nature of just being who you are, the healing nature of allowing your emotions to come out and not shaming yourself for having them, right? This is a very humanistic idea. Anyway, so those are the 9 umbrellas. So for you, Patron Kate, you're just like, you seem like person-centered, EFT, and psychodynamic. Well, I'm everything. And, when I talk to and I really am, and I have been for a long time, part of it is that I'm a professor and have focused on theory my whole career, and it's taken me 25 years to get to where I am, and I have a long way to go. But studying theory, I'm a nerd for it, and I've dedicated a lot of my professional life to becoming proficient enough such that I can quickly rattle off these 9 theories in brief. If obviously to really go into them, it would take me days. But and students will say, well, Kirk, I don't have all that. I have to practice now. I'm an intern now, or I'm a postgrad now. I barely understand even one of those theories. So what am I supposed to do? Well, what I tell people is being a therapist is a lifelong learning career. So, and you cannot rely on graduate school to teach you everything about being a therapist. That is just fact. That's a fact. No one who just graduated with their master's or doctorate is good to go. I mean, there is so much left to learn. Can you be an effective therapist? Yes, science shows that people at their internship right out of graduate school can be very effective when it comes to outcomes. So you don't have to understand theory in the way that I do to be helpful. But you do have to have a system for understanding where you're at. And that has to do with conceptualization, with understanding, with developing hypotheses as to what the problem is. You have to be systematic about conceptualization, which is a whole other skill. And if you kind of understand one of these theories enough, then you can certainly do that. But so it's a matter of understanding conceptualization, understanding how to develop intervention plans, understanding how to develop treatment plans, understanding relationship. Oh, that's the other thing I should get into is, when I talk about the relationship and when they talk about the relationship in the literature, they're talking about positive regard, empathy, rupture management, alliance. This is all kind of a humanistic, psychodynamic, or attachment-based idea. Anyway, so so what I tell people is just set out as a graduate student to learning the rest of your career and knowing that until you study on your own for 10, 15 years, you're going to be kind of lost in a lot of ways. And that's just okay. Do what you can. Know how to care, know how to listen, know how to have empathy, know how to have these are things that aren't complicated. I mean, they're kind of complicated, but learn how to really listen, learn how to avoid telling people what to do with their lives, because that's not often a good thing. Learn how to understand your countertransference. These things can be done. You need a fair amount of mentorship and consultation with this. But anyway, my point is when it comes to theory, I think, in my opinion, every therapist is responsible for being a nerd about theory their entire career. And it's reading books, it's going to trainings. It's the best thing you can do, honestly, is get a supervisor or a consultant, and you pay them, who specializes in that, in whatever you're trying to get to know. So if there's like a feminist therapist and you're just like, okay, I really want to know feminist therapy, the best way is just to hire that person, talk with them once a month, and consult with them about cases, and you'll get that sort of ground level, where the rubber meets the road kind of application of feminism to therapy. Anyway, I'm rambling. When I get back, let's take a break. When I get back, let's continue reading emails. Hey, deserving listeners, as y'all know, I am constantly recommending that people go to therapy. We all need therapy from time to time. Well, one of the options available that is definitely worth checking out is BetterHelp. If you're looking for a therapist, I would give it a try by going to betterhelp.com/Kirk. Make sure you use the promo code Kirk because you get 10% off your first month, and it really helps us out. As you watch these videos, I know many of you have been motivated to find your own therapist, which is great because you deserve it. And I know also that it can be hard to find a good fit, find the right one for you. Well, one of the options available in terms of your shopping is to go to betterhelp.com/Kirk. I've been told you can start communicating with your therapist in under 24 hours. You can message your counselor at any time. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. I've also been told that it's often less expensive than in-person therapy, and you should know that this service is available to clients worldwide. So go to betterhelp.com/Kirk to get 10% off your first month today. All right, we're back from the break. I want to give an announcement that we are offering a $2,000 scholarship. I think it's $2,000 last time I checked. Don't quote me on that. I'm only 90% sure of that. The deadline for the applications is June 15th. We've been promoting on social media, but Stacy, my wife, has been like, there aren't a lot of applications. And, $2,000, that's a lot of money. And so, we want to give back to the listeners or back to society. A lot of you are patrons of the podcast. And so we, as a group, patrons and the podcast, want to help people out. And we've given out a number of scholarships over the years. And this is our current scholarship. So if you or you know someone who is a graduate student, and so this is mainly a scholarship for graduate students in psychotherapy. So, it's marriage and family therapy, mental health counseling, psychiatry, psychology, social work, these kinds of things. Graduate degree, not a bachelor's degree, is the preferred. Now, if you have a bachelor's degree, that's okay, but you're probably, not going to be on the top of the list. So, you have a pretty good chance of getting it, or if you know someone, then they have a pretty good chance of getting it, because we have not received very many applications. So it'd be nice if we had, more applications. So tell your friends, tell everyone, to just go to our website. There's a scholarship application page. It's pretty short. We don't ask people to write like full-on essays, but you do have to submit something that's, beefy. There's three main questions that we ask. We ask, what have you done to help society? What are you going to do to help society? And why do you think you need this money over other people? And, but, even if you're not super desperate for, you're not going to, we've given scholarships to people who are literally about to be kicked out of school because they couldn't come up with tuition next quarter. We had a doctoral student that was like that, and our scholarship helped her to, complete her doctorate. But so you don't have to be necessarily in that position. But anyway, so spread the word, because you have a pretty good chance of getting it. The other thing I want to announce is that this month, the next couple of months, my life is going to become real busy for a lot of random reasons. I mean, I won't go into full details, but part of it has to do with my work at the university. I'm actually wrapping things up. I'm transitioning to a adjunct position. It's complicated, but I want to spend more time on the podcast. That's the main thing. And so I'm actually scaling back at the university quite a bit, a lot. And but because of all the tremendous amount of work that I have to do over the next couple of months, I'm not going to have a lot of time to do deep dives or anything. But so a lot of the episodes are going to be kind of like this, where I'm kind of speaking off the cuff, which I know not everyone enjoys, which I get. Some of you love them, some of you don't. This survey had mixed results. I mean, I personally love deep dives myself the most as well. When I actually get to July and August, my life will be, I presumably will have so much more free time to do deep dives and stuff. So, but the next couple months, things are going to be a little frantic for me. And so I hope that you're okay with episodes being a little unprepared. I mean, I try to keep the quality up a little bit, but just, I hope that people are okay with that. All right, let's move on. All right, this next email, interesting email from patron Duncan from Scotland. He says, after listening to your episode on Bowenian theory, I realized that I clearly have a deficit in my external differentiation. There was a high level of judgment and control exerted over me and my siblings, I believe, due to my parents' fundamentalist religious beliefs and to my mom's highly preoccupied attachment style. Despite leaving home at a young age, COVID has brought me back many years later, and I have been trying to see this as an opportunity to dig deep into my childhood wounds and emerge a stronger person. If Bowen believed that your differentiation clock stops when you leave the family home, could an extended return to that environment provide people with a second chance? I'm working my way through the book Extraordinary Relationships at your recommendation, but was wondering if you had any personal insights to add on creating differentiation with your family. My own hypothesis, actually credited to lengthy discussions with my friend Stacy, also a massive fan, around Bowen's own family of origin work, was that at its core, Bowen simply had to stand up to his family and show them and himself with pride that he was his own person. In my own case, creating differentiation might then include things like firmly resisting enmeshing and controlling and intrusive behaviors from my parents, or expressing myself in their presence in the same way that I do around my friends and strangers, like being upfront about my values, etc. Does this fit with your thinking? End of email. I love this email, patron Duncan, and shout out to your friend Stacy from Scotland, because there are so many things in here that demonstrate you're smart, you're wise, you're a fan of the podcast, you're even doing things that I've recommended, which I have to remind everyone that they should go to therapy and not rely on the podcast for that. But yeah, so let's go through this email. On one hand, so you're saying that you lack external differentiation. So I think what you're referring to is the two levels or two dimensions of differentiation we could refer to as internal and external. Internal is the ability to differentiate between our reasoning and our emotions, and the external differentiation is to differentiate between self and other. So it sounds like you have a deficit in that, meaning I'm guessing that you, particularly with your parents, have a hard time standing up for yourself. You have a hard time knowing that you're not responsible for other people's feelings, this sort of thing. You also talk about growing up with a lot of judgment and control exerted over you by fundamentalist parents and your mom's preoccupied attachment style. You also mention that Bowen believed that your differentiation clock stops when you leave the family home. Yeah, I don't know if Bowen would say that with that much certainty. Certainly, contemporary Bowenian people will hold that, including myself, that you can absolutely raise or lower your baseline differentiation level through differentiation work and family of origin work, which I'll get into in a second. And your circumstances can also temporarily raise it or lower it. So it's not like you're doomed at the age of 18. You can certainly do a lot in therapy and other kinds of things. You also say that you bought the book Extraordinary Relationships, which is a wonderful book that is both good for clinicians and lay people about Bowen ideas. It kind of walks you through everything, and it sounds like you're benefiting from that too. That's great. I'm guessing on Amazon you can get a used copy for very, very cheap. You're also saying here that, for Bowen, he needed to stand up to his family and show them and himself with pride that he was his own person. That's a wonderful way of putting it, Duncan. I hadn't thought about that, or hadn't put it in those words. But yeah, I mean, that is a fair summary of what Bowen did so that he could differentiate. And the idea, if you don't know, if you haven't listed all the other deep dives on differentiation in Bowen, that when we can differentiate from our parents and our family, meaning that we can be ourselves while being because anyone can just run away from one's parents. But the idea is that you want to stay in contact with your parents emotionally and, seeing them, while also remaining in contact with yourself. So that's differentiation, the ability to say, I am me and they are them, and I'm in a relationship with them, but I'm me and they are them. And also that translates into the ability to differentiate between your emotions and your thinking ability, which gives you much stronger control over enacting your goals in life. Meaning that if you become frequently flooded with emotion that washes out your ability to think straight, then it's hard to make decisions in life that don't shoot yourself in your own foot. So anyway, yeah, for Bowen, standing up to his family, because he came from a seemingly enmeshed family. And so for him, a big part, and everyone's different, but for him, a big part of it was not allowing his family to overpower him, not allowing their triangulated processes rope him into things that he didn't really want to do. And when he did that, when he differentiated in that way, it actually translated into a lot of other personality benefits that didn't have anything to do with his family of origin. You also mentioned here that for you, you're wondering, maybe for me, my version of family of origin therapy is resisting my parents as they try to enmesh with me, and resisting my parents as they try to control me, resisting their intrusive behaviors against me, having boundaries with them. And that very well could be true. I don't know. You would obviously have to find out for yourself, and you'd be better off talking with a therapist in person about this, obviously. But yeah, it's very possible. But the key is how do you do it? And I've worked with a lot of people. Family of origin work is very complicated. And you also mentioned that because of COVID, you've had to move back home. And is this a good opportunity? Yeah, it is. With a lot of clients, what we're working on is when they go home for vacation or something, or for a holiday, and that's when they have to do it. So they have to try to do these family of origin work things in those brief periods. But if you're home all the time, then there's a lot of opportunity for that. And the way that I explain this to client is the following. I mean, I usually go into more detail, but just in brief, I will say something like, so when you go home, there's this thing that you can do, and it's called family of origin work. It has to do with differentiation. I might explain all that stuff. And the idea is that when you go home, there are two kind of main prongs that you want to address. One is that you want to get to know your parents as human beings as best as you can. And one of the best ways that you can do that is to ask them questions about their life, about their childhood, about their current life, because this has a number of different effects. One is that it puts you on their level, and for some people they're like, look, I'm Chinese, I'm never going to be on the, because white Americans, not always, but they tend to be more cool with being peers with their parents, whereas other cultures like Chinese culture, not all of them, but many will say my parents will never allow me to be on their level. So it doesn't have to be purely as a peer, but more, friendly, like you're all adults. Maybe that's a better way to put it. It's like approaching your parents instead of you're a child, and even though you're 40 years old, not approaching them like you're a child, but approaching them like you are a family member you're both adults. And so you go to your parents and you just ask them questions about their life. How are things going? You might even get into their childhood, what was it like growing up, this kind of thing. That can also be wonderful. And through this, you actually differentiate. And so how do I explain this? Well, anyway, the other prong is what you're talking about, Duncan, which is, so one prong is to approach your parents and have all these relational experiences where you're an adult, a fellow adult family member. The other prong is boundary making, essentially, which is pushing back during times. But you don't want to just push back. You want to push in ways that you want to push in. So, for example, they come at you and they're like, so we are all going to make dinner tonight together, and that's what we're going to do as a family, because that's what we always do as a family, and you're busy. You don't want to do that, or I don't know, you just don't like doing it. So you say, if you're, depending, if this is a kind of a rough example, but it's possible in that example, you would say, no, I don't really want to do that. I appreciate that you want me to do that, and I'm sorry, but I don't really like making dinner with everyone. It's too chaotic. It seems like there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and I feel like everyone's just bossing me around, and I just don't want to do it. And thanks for the offer. But Mom and Dad, what I would love to do is go for a walk with you after dinner, because I love going for walks with you. Okay. So it's differentiation, family of origin work is not just pushing back on parents. It's not just telling them to go to hell. Okay. It's about connecting in a way that is more an even playing field, where now they might say, I hate going on walks with you, but they probably won't, right? A lot of people, when they do family of origin work, will interpret it as letting their parents have it, getting kind of like revenge. Like, I've been intruded upon my entire life and I'm not going to take it anymore. And that's a part of it for sure. But if you just want to reject your parents, then you can just call them up and say, go to hell, and just don't visit them, you know? But if you really want to differentiate, differentiation is about being who you are while being in loving relationships. It's not just about being who you are. At least this is the contemporary Bohemian notion, or at least the way I'm interpreting it, is that differentiation is the ability to have boundaries, to be who you are, to be able to push back, to tell people what's up, to be upfront about your needs and your complaints, but also being loving in a way that you want to love by telling people, this is what I like to do with my family members. This is how I want to be loved. This is how I love you. This is how I want to be with you. I want to be in contact with you. I want us to negotiate how we are in contact with each other. I just don't want it to always be your way, because I don't like your way all the time. So let's figure out a way that we both can love each other at the same time. There's got to be some Venn diagram overlap in how we want to love each other. You want me to cook dinner with you. I don't want to do that. I want you to, watch football with me. You don't want to do that. But the two of us like to go for walks for each other. And so let's do that, That's what family of origin work. And so those two prongs. So on one prong, you are, establishing boundaries. And on the other prong, you are working on becoming more friendly and more of an adult relationship with them. And often what that means is, like I said, investigating their past. The sort of golden zone on family of origin work is asking your parents about what it was like when they were growing up. And your parents are just like, well, I was born in this zone and my dad was sort of this way. And they're just going off on history. A lot of parents really want to tell you that, particularly if you are coming across as non-judgmental. That's the key. You can't go to your parents and say, tell me about your childhood because I want to figure out why you're such a bad parent. Like, you can't say that. Parents generally want to share their lives with their kids. Now, some parents are really uptight about that, so sometimes it's hard to do that. But that's sort of the golden zone. What I have seen happen when people do all these things, and it can take a long time, and it's not easy because you can lose differentiation very quickly as you head into these relationship interactions, is you rinse and repeat this process enough, and you do it well enough, and you do it such that your parents don't run away from you as you're doing it. People emerge on the other side much more differentiated, much more able to know who they are and what they want, less intimidated by other people, more sure of themselves, more able to love, more able to non-anxiously be in love with other people and to tell people what they want, to call up your parents and say, I love you and I want to spend time with you, instead of constantly being on your heels trying to react to their agenda on you. The ability to approach them with power, with an adult, mentality. And this translates not only, just your relationship to your parents, but to relationships with everyone. The ability to push back on your boss, the ability to know who you are, the ability to love another person fully, or at least, as fully as you can, without being too worried about losing your sense of self in the process. So this family of origin work, and then some people say, well, what if my parents are dead? Well, there's ways to do it. And you can listen to my family of origin episode. I think I did a long time ago. Let me take a guess as to when that would have been. Well, sometimes I just need to look it up. I'm going to do it right now while I'm talking to you. Dopey-dopey-do, going to my website. So you go to the list of episodes page, and I'm going to type Control F or Command F if you're a Apple user. So that gives you the ability to search if you didn't know that. And then I type in family of origin. So that episode was about 5 years ago, and it is called Family of Origin Work, and it is only for patrons. I wonder if I also did a FOO thing, because sometimes we will family of origin, FOO, FOO. No, I did not do an episode. Anyway, so that is my answer to that question. But patron Duncan from Scotland and Stacy, the two of you are very wise, very smart people. Let's answer another email. All right, let's do speed round, because I have so many emails, and I always feel so bad that I don't get to everyone's email. So I'm going to do speed round. We have patron Steph from Massachusetts. She writes, what do you think of the true crime TV's frequent claim that a spouse or parent of a murder victim didn't seem to be grieving or seemed unaffected is further evidence of their guilt? Yeah, so this is a frequent misunderstanding of grief that actually can cause people to end up being wrongfully convicted. Namely, if you've heard the joke, my baby ate my or a dingo ate my baby, a baby ate my dingo. It's actually a really tragic story about a woman in Australia, I believe, who actually a dingo, which is a small dog, actually ate her baby, or took her baby into the night, into the bushes, and ate the child. And because the mother, according to people watching on the news, when the mother was because it's a very sensationalized story, and this is in the 70s, I believe, and 80s, and all these news cameras are following her around, and because the mother did not exhibit enough of what seemed to be normal grief to them. Again, think about a month later after your baby has died and you're trying to walk to your car and there's a bunch of news cameras in your face. You're not going to be very happy about that. And so because she didn't exhibit what people thought she should be exhibiting, then this actually led to her being convicted of murdering her own child, and went to prison, and years later was exonerated because they found more evidence that absolutely showed that she hadn't. And the case that she had murdered her child was propped up on extremely dubious evidence. But anyway, the case of Amanda Knox could absolutely be argued that because Amanda Knox in Italy was not exhibiting what people thought people should exhibit after a crime, is evidence of guilt is absurd. You have to go through something like that to understand what it's like, and it varies. Everyone reacts to grief differently. There was another case actually that I talk about. I give a whole presentation on. I have a whole lecture on this, of a father who came home and his trailer had burnt down and his kids died inside, tragically. And when the first responders arrived, the father did just seem to be talking in a matter-of-fact manner. He's like, "Yep, I came home. It was engulfed in flames. I didn't see my kids. I don't know what happened." And the first responders, in their lack of expertise on grief, decided that he must be guilty. The police officers, because he's not on the ground like writhing in pain. People deal with grief. There's denial. There's shock. There's a lot of different reactions to grief, and a lot of grief reactions happen internally. They don't show up on your face, and they certainly don't show up to first responders when they come up to you and go like, "What happened?" Right? So this notion on TV and in our society that says that I don't know, that person didn't seem to be grieving or they seemed unaffected by that, is a bunch of crap. And a lot of it is prosecutors looking for their own, and police officers, the justice system, they're highly motivated to find the killer, to find the perpetrator, which is good, but that often will cloud them to, the process of proper investigation, and they'll use shortcuts. And one of them is to utilize this cultural notion that they know will actually go over well with the jury, that the person wasn't exhibiting what they thought to be normal grief reaction after the event, which is just completely silly. Now, can a guilty person who, say someone murders someone and they call the police and say, "Oh my God, my wife fell down the stairs and she died," even though the husband pushed her down the stairs, can someone exhibit behavior that could indicate the possibility of guilt? Yeah. People have a hard time lying sometimes, or they fake grief, or maybe but just the fact that someone is unaffected or seems unaffected to, frankly, a bunch of lay people arriving at the scene doesn't say anything. I mean, you could use it as part of 1,000 pieces of data to build your case, but to build your case completely on that, which is what happened in Australia. I think her name was Lindy Chamberlain. The entire investigation was based on the fact that she, according to people watching the news, was not exhibiting normal grief as news cameras were being shoved in her face months after the event happened. All right, lightning round. Patron Alex from Utah says, "How do I create good relationships with social anxiety? I'm 21 years old and I've never kissed a girl, and I feel like I don't really have any friends. Even though I've been trying to start new positive habits, I continue to fall into old negative ways of thinking, and the habits never catch on. I try to think positively, like I've learned in therapy, but I feel like I'm just lying to myself. End of email. Well, Patron Alex, I'm good. I'm glad you're in therapy. Continue to go. You might, benefit from a second opinion, maybe a different approach. So if you find yourself still struggling, even with the current therapy you're in, it's worth finding another approach to your social anxiety. There are a lot of different approaches. Some work better for others and some don't. But you're asking, look, I have social anxiety. I really want to have friends. I want to have romantic relationships. And I'm guessing you become extremely terrified and have a lot of negative thoughts that get into your head. And then you have negative habits like avoidance of others and other kinds of things. And it's really hard. Yeah. If social anxiety was easy, we wouldn't have it in the DSM. Social anxiety is debilitating. It's awful. It's a real thing. A lot of people are just like, you're just kind of shy. You just got to get out there. It's like, no, it's not that easy. It's rough. It's on the level of like OCD or something, right? Or like major depression. It's it gets entrenched in there, and it's hard, and it's physiological. It's not just like a thought of, oh, what if I make a fool out of myself? Your whole body gets thrown out of whack. And so the key is cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, it could also be related to other things like traumas and attachment-based things, but at the very least, you need to be thinking about your automatic thoughts, your core beliefs, your schemas, and challenging those. And you also have to be doing a lot of behavioral therapy, meaning that you have to expose yourself to things very slowly. What's happening for a lot of people with social anxiety is their body. So let me give another parallel example. For me, I suffer from what's called illness anxiety, or what people call like hypochondria or something. And I don't have a huge case of it, but enough. And I will, for example, in the past, so, rewind the clock 10 years and I have to give a blood sample, or someone's going to give me a shot or something, a vaccine. My body, even so, my mind is like, everything's fine. I know enough about medicine, and I trust, medical professionals enough to know that everything's going to be fine. And even if things aren't fine, I'm sure they could fix it. Or even if I, die from this vaccine, like, that's just life. People die sometimes, you just can't really get away from it. And so my mind is like, there's really nothing to worry about here. There's nothing rational about how my body is so terrified in this moment as I contemplate going to the doctor and giving a vial of blood for a blood test of some sort. But my body, which is 99% of who I am, outside of my prefrontal cortex, is utterly, utterly terrified right now. I can't stop thinking about it. I can't sleep. I'm shaking. I'm confused as I head into the hospital. So my mind knows one thing, and the rest of me, the 99% rest of me, knows a different reality, and will kick and scream all the way into that doctor's office. And then the downside to this is that I'm mildly traumatized by my own anxiety, because every time I go to the hospital or a doctor, my body goes into complete panic. And so it furthers that association with hospitals and doctors with danger. And so it just gets worse and worse and worse. So what I did to myself is I slowly, through a lot of meandering, twists and turns, exposed myself to medicine procedures so that my body will get used to it. I will become habituated. That's the behaviorist term. I want to become habituated to the stimulus, which is going to the hospital or having a shot or having a procedure or something, because my body is not used to it, and I need to get my body used to it. And once my body is used to it, it'll catch up with my mind, which is telling the rest of my body everything's going to be okay. So with social anxiety, it's the same procedure. You have to habituate to social experiences. Your prefrontal cortex is likely saying, this is my problem. I have this excessive anxiety. It's not rational. I'm too worried about this and the other, and it's preventing me from being able to just walk up to people and talk to them, or just, interact with people. And the cure for that is habituation. So you have to have a lot of social experiences. Now, how do you do that? Well, there are various different ways to do it, but one way is to, gradually work yourself up the ladder. So you start with something extremely low risk, but will cause anxiety, but it's extremely low on the anxiety scale. My dog is barking. And you habituate to that level, and then you take another step forward, and you do a bunch of things in that zone, and you habituate to that level, and then you just keep going down the line, and eventually you're at the top rung of the ladder, and you will habituate to that, and then everything will be better, and your body will catch up with your mind. So that's the key. And if your therapist isn't doing something like that with you, I might get a second opinion. All right, this next email is also from patron Steph from Massachusetts, writing in again. She writes, I relate to almost everything about avoidant attachment when you talk about it. But your attachment deep dive posits that a fundamental aspect of avoidant attachment is that when the child isn't getting their needs met, they have to choose whether it is they themselves or others who are bad, and avoidant people choose that others are bad. However, I have a schema of defectiveness myself, but avoid people as a result. Is it possible for avoidantly attached people to in fact believe that it is they themselves who are bad? Or by the clinical definition of avoidant attachment, is this possible? And the defectiveness schema suggests some other pathology or deficit like avoidant personality disorder. End of email. Yeah. So again, I really love this question. It means that you're really learning and you're investigating the self and learning about the self. So the first thing I'll say is that it's less important that we have a label for it, and more important that you understand the underlying structure, which you seem to do. You seem to understand that you have a defective schema, you avoid people as a result, and you're like, I kind of feel like I'm avoidant attachment, but am I avoidant personality disorder? Because that's really a different thing. Avoidant attachment style, very different from avoidant personality disorder as a concept. So, people get real hung up on the labels, and it's way more important to understand the underlying structure. Just saying someone's avoiding attachment doesn't really say much. You really have to know what sort it is. There's literally a million different presentations of avoiding attachment. So it doesn't really tell us much. But given what you said, it's possible, and again, talk with a therapist about this, that one could conceptualize your situation as, so you definitely say you have a schema of defectiveness. Okay, so that means I believe that there's something deeply wrong with me, and I believe that other people don't have that. Whatever sort of deep, dark, horrible thing is about me, other people generally don't have this. There's something different about me. And if people knew that, this terrible thing about me, they would understand just how defective I really am inherently. Okay, so that is very different from avoidant attachment style, because avoidant attachment style people tend to be more on the narcissistic spectrum, where they believe that they're special and that other people are the defective ones. So this sort of lends itself towards this idea that you actually might be on the preoccupied spectrum or disorganized spectrum, and the defectiveness is a part of that. And that you, in fact, avoid in a way that is similar to avoidant personality disorder as opposed to avoidant attachment. Avoidantly attached people will avoid relationships consciously, not because they think there's something wrong with themselves. It's because they don't think they need anyone. That's the reason why avoidant attached style people avoid closeness and emotions and vulnerability and that sort of thing, and they're pathologically independent, is because they literally consciously think that they're fine on their own, that they don't need other people. They don't have needs. They often will say, I don't have emotions, this kind of thing. And they do, but they avoid that reality. So it doesn't sound like you really fit that. Now, maybe you do, but to have a schema of defectiveness tells me that you are aware of the vulnerability that you have, those kinds of feelings. So yeah, it could be, that a therapist might conceptualize you as avoidant personality disorder instead of avoidant attachment. For some people, they can be so preoccupied that they actually will avoid. And a lot of people get hung up on this idea, and it bears repeating that. Some people will say like, well, I really relate to preoccupied attachment style, but I also really relate to avoidant. And once we get into it, not always, because some people can have aspects of both. There's nothing wrong with that. And people get really hung up on that too. They'll be like, I have preoccupied and avoidant. What am I? I'm like, you have both. It's, it's fine. There's 4 categories in attachment, theory, not 7.5 billion people aren't going to fit neatly into each category. It's fine. You have a little bit of both. It's okay. You can also be literally all four of them, kind of. You know what I mean? So, but often what I find when they claim to be mixtures is that they're better conceptualized as someone with preoccupied attachment who will, when they get pushed so far, they will avoid. But they are deeply preoccupied with relationships, and their way of coping with that is to just call off relationships every once in a while because they just can't take it anymore. Avoidant attached people, they just consistently avoid. They just default almost all the time to pathological independence. All right, another email. Patron Helena wrote in and says, is it possible for a person with narcissistic personality disorder to love you and to have a fulfilling long-term relationship with them? End of question. Yes, absolutely. Do not listen to the internet. The internet is full of some of the most destructive misinformation on narcissism around. So, just 99% of everything on the internet is just completely false. They're basically talking about psychopaths, or it's people basically just making up stories about other people that paints other people in a bad light. It's actually a big problem, and it actually interferes with people's ability to understand their spouses because they see their spouse through the internet lens, which is not helpful. But yes, people with any personality disorder can love you, can have empathy. People with psychopathy and sadistic psychopathy and dark triad, no, and dark tetrad, no, they probably can't love you. But these people are extremely rare. Narcissistic personality disorder is more prevalent, and they absolutely are capable of love and are capable of empathy as much as anyone else is. It's just that they are impaired on their empathy because they're so desperately defended because they learned they need to uphold a narcissistic veil in order to get through the day because they're suffering so much. It doesn't mean that they can't hurt you. It doesn't mean that they might not have any empathy towards you that you can notice, but they are capable of that. And the key is, so then you say, is it possible to have fulfilling long-term relationship with someone with narcissistic personality disorder? The answer also is yes. But the key is, and you might not be able to engineer this, the key is that the person with narcissistic personality disorder has to feel safe. That's true with any personality disorder. If the person feels safe, then they will not be symptomatic. If someone with borderline feels safe, which might be hard to engineer, then the person with borderline personality disorder will not lash out at you. If a narcissistic personality disorder person feels safe, feels attachment security, which again can be very hard to engineer, then they don't have to grasp at narcissistic supply. They don't have to stomp on you in order to make themselves feel better because they feel safe. Now, for some people with personality disorders, it is extremely difficult to make them feel safe, particularly if you're their spouse. If you're a therapist, you have a much better chance in the beginning, but even then, it can be very, very hard. So is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? I don't know. It's case by case. All right, this next question is from patron Dave from California. He writes, you mentioned how you started teaching at Antioch nearly immediately after graduating. What advice do you have for therapists who want to teach at a university in addition to their clinical work? I know that university teaching positions, adjuncts and full-time, are incredibly competitive, but I wanted to hear your insight specifically regarding MFT or counseling programs. How difficult is it to teach, at least part-time, and how important is it to have a doctorate degree? What advice do you have for aspiring MFT professors? Yeah, so what I'll say is that I don't know every university in the United States, particularly around the world, but I do know a number of universities, and I have heard enough experiences to be able to say the following, which is, in order to get, there are two main routes to getting a job as a university professor in MFT or counseling or psychology or social work. One route is the traditional route, and that is usually by getting a doctorate degree and starting to apply. And also in your doctorate degree, you want to specialize in something. You want to have a good resume. You want to have a well-rounded kind of thing. You want to get experience teaching as best you can, maybe assistant teaching, this kind of thing. And so this is and then you just start applying. Usually what this route will require is moving. like a lot of our professors in my program that came to us from that angle, where they just were, normal, hey, we have a new doctoral level professor that we need to hire, and this, cattle call goes out and people start applying from all over the world. And then we interview people and we hire someone. Usually those people had to move to Seattle, because to find the best candidate that happens to be looking for a job, it's usually not going to be in the town that you're in. And so that's that route. So the downside to that is you got to move, but maybe that's a plus side. The other route to getting a job as a professor is through essentially networking, which is essentially how I got the job, which is that I had an advisor who became my mentor, and he and I just bonded, and he just decided that I was going to teach. I didn't even want to teach. And he just said, okay, you're teaching. I'm like, okay. Because I just saw him as like this golden ticket to a better career. And I was right. And so now I could have approached him and befriended him and got him to believe in me, and then asked him, hey, could I assistant teach, or could I start teaching? That would have been the more regular route. And so I was director for a while. And so I hired people in both ways. I hired people by the cattle call with the, looking for people all over the country, and then they moved to Seattle to work. And I also would find students in my program who I would stay in touch with after graduation. And then I would say, oh, I need someone to teach this thing. I bet you this one student that I know that I've stayed in contact with, or my mentee or my supervisee, would be a good candidate to teach this class. I'll ask them. And then, or they've been bugging me saying, hey, if you need anyone to teach this class. So those are the two avenues. And you can do both. You can do one or the other. And and the key to the second route is to be in frequent contact. So if you become, and you have to be in contact with the person that makes the choice to hire. So it's usually the program director. And so you got to know that person's email address or phone, maybe take them out to lunch and say, look, I want to teach all these classes. The next chance you got, give me a shot. I know, you can even, I'll even intern as a teacher. I'll assistant teach for free for a while to kind of learn the ropes. And then every 3 months, 6 months, you just keep bugging them. You say, hey, just wanted to reach out to you. I'm taking some trainings. I got some more skills because I taught a luncheon class at my agency the other day, and I just really love teaching, and I feel like I'd be good at teaching this and that. Those people, you stick with it and you have the talent. Usually, you get a shot, maybe as an adjunct, and then as an adjunct, you will be chosen a couple years later to become full-time, that kind of thing. All right. Well, that does it for that episode. I didn't get to as many emails as I hoped, as always. And everyone out there, and again, tell everyone about the scholarship. Go to our website. June 15th, 2021 is the deadline. $2,000, I believe. Actually, let me look it up. I'm on the website, scrolling to the top and going to scholarship. And then, June 15th, $2,000. So they can fill out the form there and maybe win. Oh, wait, we have more questions. So references, how have you made the world a better place? How do you plan to make the world a better place in the future? Why do you need this money? And just another question like, what else would you like us to consider? Just other kinds of things. Anyway. And everyone out there, please, please, please take care of yourself and take care of others, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.